Hi everybody. In this video I'm going to show you how to deal with home sewing patterns. One of the problems with home sewing patterns is that, as everybody complains, they don't fit. There's a good reason why they don't fit. First of all, you're probably buying the wrong size, and I will tell you why. The pattern companies tell you to buy it by your bust measurement. First of all, the bust measurement they give you on the outside of their pattern packet isn't correct. All right? It is 2 inches smaller than the bust pattern actually fits. So right off, you're in trouble. Everyone knows that you choose the pattern size by your bust size. This, by the way, is wrong. And the reason it's wrong is because unless you are a true B-cup, your pattern's not going to fit you. You need to choose your pattern size by your chest size. To get your chest size, remove your clothing except for your bra and measure your chest right underneath your bust, and that will give you your chest measurement. Add 2 inches to that, and that will give you the measurement that you need to use when you choose your pattern. We have a model that we are using, and she happens to have a 39-inch chest. Add 2 inches to that and you get 41. So when we look on this pattern packet here, we see the choices are 40 and 42. I'm choosing to use a size 42 for our model. Granted, it would be just a little loose, but that's okay. She likes to wear her clothes loose. You're going to need tracing paper. You can buy this at art supply stores. Do not buy white tracing paper. It's opaque and you can't see through it. Buy canary yellow. It's a light yellow tracing paper and it works very well. And I need enough to cover this pattern. I'm going to fold it back like this. Now I'm going to take my 18-inch ruler and tear it. I'm turning it over so that I can tape the pattern to the tracing paper. Not only does tracing the pattern off save you time in the long run, it also preserves the pattern so that you can use the pattern again. Only a couple of pieces of tape are needed. And I have some weights here. I bought them at the hardware store. They're just big, heavy washers. That's all they are. Put them down like that. That's going to hold things flat on the table. Now, very, very important. Before you begin to trace, mark the straight grain on the pattern and the cross grain. This gives you an intersection that if the pattern moves, you can quick put it back in place. And then another item that you might find very useful with sewing is a 4-foot straight edge. It's not a 4-foot yardstick. A yardstick is always 3 feet 36 inches. I'm going to lay this down on center front and make sure it's on line like this. And all right, there's the center front line. And here, I know from the grid, but if I didn't have a grid, I could check with my L square. And we've got a cross grain line. When you cut out your garments, you need to have the fabric on grain on both the straight grain and the cross grain. That's very important. I'll show you that in later videos, but you want to have your fabric cut on perfect grain. And measuring from the selvage to the straight grain and making sure that that's even the whole way does not necessarily mean that you've cut it on grain. What matters is that it's on grain where you cut. So, especially with knits, that can be very difficult if you're measuring from the straight grain to the selvage. You need to make sure that where you cut it's on the straight grain and on the cross grain. All right, so I'm going to put in this line here, and that gives me a straight grain and a cross grain. Since this is also center front, I'm going to put a CF there, which means center front, so I know that that's a center front. Now that that is done, the next thing I'm going to do is trace off the pattern. Here on the facing, I'm going to just trace it the way it is, because the more facing the better. And since we are working with a size 20, I'm going to put size 20 on here right now, so I know that that's the size that I'm tracing off. And size 20 is the smallest, so I'm going to follow the smallest line around here. I think the skirt curve is going to do this better. I flip my tools very easily. It takes a while to get used to doing that. So notice that I'm laying the L square so that this is on the table, not extending back here. And that's what you want to do. You want to make sure that your tools are supported as you are tracing off. Okay, that's in. It's important to trace off the bust point, which is right here. However, this is one thing that varies from one pattern to another. You have to be very careful with bust darts, because they are often higher or lower in the same size pattern. Unfortunately, the pattern makers with the home sewing patterns are not keeping their bust points in the correct spot according to their grade rule. Grade rule is a set of measurements that determines the measurements for each size. And the name of the size, say a size 9, size 10, 20, 25, it's just jargon. It's jargon that indicates to the company that, say, size 10 represents this particular set of measurements. And from one company to another, the size 10 will differ, or size 12 will differ, because their grade rules are different. So that's all that means. So if you know that you wear, say, a size 20 in this particular company's clothing, that doesn't mean you wear a size 20 in another company's clothing, because they're using a different set of grade rules, and a size 20 in one company can be a very large garment. In another company, it might be much smaller. All right, now I'm going to turn this around so that I can trace more. And when I turn it, I'm making sure that my cross grain lines are right on top of the lines on the underlying pattern. It's moved a little bit. Let's see here. This line should be down at the bottom. This line should be right on center front. You need to know that if it moves, it's not the end of the world. There, now it looks like it's all lined up correctly. Okay. And you need to keep checking every time you move your work. And move your work around so that it's convenient for you. You don't want to be stretching way over and trying to do your work. Move it so it's close to you, and that way your work will be more accurate. Right now, as I said, we're dealing with a size 20. This is a shoulder here. This is a cutting line, it's 5/8. But I want the shoulder to be a 1/2 inch seam allowance. And the first thing I'm going to do is write on the shoulder 1/2 inch S.A. which means 1/2 inch seam allowance. When I cut the garment out, I'm going to take the pattern with the cut piece to the sewing machine. That way I look at the pattern and I know what the seam allowance is when I sew the garment. This is extremely important. You need to be very accurate with your pattern work, with your cutting, and with your sewing. And if you are, then your finished garment will fit if you've started out with the right measurements. And that's what we're doing. Accuracy matters. In the industry, pattern makers work to 1/32 of an inch. The sample makers, which are the best sewers in the company, they sew to an accuracy of 1/16 of an inch. These tiny measurements matter because they add up. 4 seams, if each seam is off 1/16 of an inch, The total is off 1/8. If there's 4 seams, it is off 1/2 inch. 1/2 inch is the difference in half a size in the smaller petite garments. Half a size. That's a big difference. So now we're going to trace this off. It's the smallest size. This is a 5/8 inch seam allowance. I'm going to measure from behind the line, and I'm going to measure, oops, this pencil has gotten a little bit dull. You want very sharp points. I'm going to measure here. I'm going to mark a line, and this is now 1/8 of an inch below the 5/8 inch cutting line. This means that this seam is to be sewn on 1/2 inch seam allowance. I've reduced it that 1/8. This means that when I sew the shoulder, I do not have to trim the seam. And I'm also going to mark the notch right through the point. Notice that I'm squaring my ruler. See, the line is on the line here, and then I have a line this way. That's a 90-degree angle, which is called a square. And I'm going to put a line through there, and I'm going to put a cross through here. You don't want to cut your notches any deeper than 1/8 of an inch. Do not cut little V's. Just cut a little snip like this. You'll be able to find it when you sew. And to make sure that I don't miss it when I cut the garment out, I'm going to put an arrow there so I know that there is a notch. All right? So the shoulder is now marked with a 1/2 inch seam allowance. It's been reduced that amount. The next thing I'm going to do is reduce the neck. And these little dots here, this indicates that this is a size 20. The neck line is 5/8 inch seam allowance. That's way too much. Okay, here we go. I'm going all the way around. There we go, and I'm going to mark it 1/4, so I know 1/4 inch seam allowance. Now I can do the armhole, and I can do the side seam. The armhole is sewn on a 3/8 inch seam allowance. That means that because this is a 5/8 inch seam allowance here, we want to move the cutting line in 1/4 of an inch. That will reduce the 5/8 inch to a 3/8 inch seam allowance. So I'm going to mark in 1/4 of an inch. Again, I'm marking behind the line because, see, then the ruler is behind the line that I'm marking as well. And I'm marking right on down, marking off 1/4. Now, if this were a sleeveless blouse, you would want to take off 3/8 because a sleeveless blouse has a 1/4 inch seam allowance at the armhole. But this is going to have a sleeve sewn into the armhole. That means that there's going to be stress on the seam. You do not want to sew any seam on 1/4 of an inch that has stress. It needs to have a 3/8 inch seam allowance, not 1/4. When you sew the garment together, you're sewing on gauge. If you're sewing on gauge on a 3/8 inch seam allowance, the needle will sew on that sewing line. So there's no need to mark this on the pattern. It's just going to waste your time. The other thing I want to do is I want to mark in the notch. Again, I'm squaring it right in. See, the line of the ruler is right against the line that I marked for the cutting line, and bringing it in at a 90-degree angle. And I'm going to mark off 1/8. You want to cut your notches no deeper than 1/8 of an inch. And that gives me the mark for the notch. And this is a 3/8 inch seam allowance here. And this is going to be 1/2 inch seam allowance at the shoulder and a 1/4 inch seam allowance at the neck. There's no stress at the neck, so you can have 1/4 of an inch seam allowance there. The next thing I'm going to do is the side seam. The side seam is sewn on a 1/2 inch seam allowance. And so this means, because this is 5/8, I'm going to mark it back 1/8 of an inch. Right? 1/2 plus 1/8 is 5/8. There are 4/8 in a half, and 1/8 more makes 5/8. So if I take off 1/8 of an inch, it is a 1/2 inch seam allowance. This little circle, you want to put a notch right there, even though it's coming in at an angle. I'm just following it through with those little notches. I'm going to put an arrow there. And here are 2 notches here. And I'm going to mark off an 1/8 inch line over them. and put a double arrow here, so I make sure to cut them. And this notch here needs an arrow. We also have a dart here. This is a bust dart, and so we're going to mark this like this. We want to put this in for now. We've already marked the bust point here. We put a bust point on there. Now, is this bust point going to be the correct bust point for our model? Probably not. And probably the bust points on your patterns are not correct for you. If you have a dart and you're sewing the dart in and the bust point is too high or too low for you, your garment's not going to fit you well. So this is one of the things that really has to be checked and changed if necessary before you cut the garment. This all affects fit. But of all the things that affect fit, nothing seems to matter more than the bust fit. And this has got a curve in here. And just mark it in like this. And I'm going to mark the notches, or rather the little circles, but they're really marks that you make on the fabric so you know how to sew it. All right, the only thing left is the hemline. Got to make sure my lines are all exactly right. They're moving even though this has been taped together. So it's very, very important to keep checking that. Notice that I'm just doing a little area and then another little area to make sure that I can blend the lines. This is a little bit off in here. Put this in like this. And now I'm going to mark this. I'm going to put model's pattern. And this is a size 20. Okay, and I'm also going to put the year. This is 2020. Now, because this was marked down 1/8, we want to mark this down 1/8 too. First of all, I'm going to check to make sure that all the lines are lined up together. There, we've got it correct. It's very, very important that you be very accurate with this. 1/8 of an inch. There, and the whole thing is marked. And now I'm going to take this off from the underlying pattern. The tape here, and off it comes. Now the pattern can be put back into the pattern envelope, and we have a copy of the pattern here, and this is ready to be cut in muslin. Now I'm going to trace off the back pattern. I've laid out the paper and folded it. So the first thing I need to do now is cut it, and I'm going to use the transparent ruler again. Home sewers cut their garments out on the fold. You never ever want to do this. You don't know that the underlying ply is necessarily on grain. The fold affects the fit, not a lot, but some. And if you're matching, it's highly unlikely that the bottom piece will match. And lay it over the back pattern, like this. And then I'm going to fold it. My fingers. Notice that I fold from the center out. That's how you correctly fold paper. And now, I'm going to lay it over like this, and I'm going to lay the pattern like this. And I'm going to lay it so the fold of the pattern lies over the fold of the tracing paper. And I'm going to trace off one side, turn it over, and then trace the other side so that we have a pattern that opens. Because you want to cut everything on the open. Never ever cut anything on the fold. I told my students over and over again, we have an F word in the industry, and that F word is fold. Don't cut on the fold. You've been told to do this over and over again. Don't do it. It's a sure way to ruin your garments. Put a little more tape than I did on the front. Maybe it'll keep it in line better. And I'm going to turn it over. We already have a straight grain line because it's the fold. Is this on the line? Yes. That's a cross grain line. Whoops. A little bit off here. And draw a line here. Put arrows and arrows, and this is the straight grain. And remember, this is a size 20. And this is the back. And it's 2020. We want the year on there, so we keep everything dated. Even children can sew on a 1/4 inch seam allowance. There we go. The shoulder, so this is 1/4, and this is going to be 1/2. So we mark that down 1/8, and we mark the notch, of course, on there, and an arrow, so remember to cut it. Once again, the armhole is going to be 3/8 because it has a sleeve, so we want to mark it down 1/4. 5/8 minus 3/8 is 1/4. And we have 2 notches here. 2 notches are always put in the back armhole to tell you that it's the back. 1 notch is put in the front armhole to tell you that's the front. And it's very, very important to put these notches in, because when you're sewing, if you're putting the right sleeve into the left armhole, you quickly find out that the notches don't match up. That's why you need notches. I'm going to mark it 1/8 inch and double arrows so we know to cut it. The side seam again is 1/2 inch. And so we're going to mark this down 1/8 because 5/8 minus 1/8 is 1/2, and that's the seam allowance we want. Now this pattern has a lot of curve in the waist. And my guess is that most people are not going to need that curve, which is one of the reasons you want to make a muslin, to make sure the garment's going to fit you. Now once you have a blouse pattern that fits you well, there is no point in going and buying more blouse patterns. You can take that blouse pattern and you can change the style, just a little bit of this, a little bit of that. The industry does this all the time. Don't think, even for 1 minute, that each garment on the next year's line of clothing from a manufacturer has been made from scratch. They have taken the old styles and they've said, why did this sell? What was the feature about this blouse that made it sell? And what was the feature about this other blouse that made it sell? Let's put those 2 features together and we'll have a 3rd blouse and we'll put it on the line this year. And that is what they do. And you can save yourself a lot of time at home by doing the very same thing that industry does. Right, there's the notches here. I'm going to mark them. And of course, a stop. So I know to stop cutting right there. That's 1/8 inch. And now I'm going to turn it down here. And we follow the smaller line. I'm not bothering to shorten the hem at all. You can always use a little extra length in the hem. And if I just use my ruler and just run it along the curves, you'll see right away that the curve is being picked up. All right, and then of course, I still need to put a line in here, a line in here, a line in here for this dart. So I want to make sure I line them up properly when it's sewn. And by the way, you'll notice that I'm not connecting these lines because when I sew this, I can just cut right through that line and get that curve. There's no point in marking it. It'll still be fine. All right, and I'm going to take this off. Oops, I forgot this. Got to get that. Check your work as you're about to take it off because it's very easy to make a mistake. And you don't want to have to be fooling around with it when you're at the sewing machine. All right. Now, will our model actually need this dart in her clothes? My guess is she won't, because she tends to have a fairly full waistline, but we're putting it in the pattern just in case she does, so we know where it was. Okay. So now I'm removing the pattern. I'm going to make sure this is squared at the neckline, that it goes across right. So this is just a matter of tracing off what I've already done. To be proficient at pattern work, you really need to watch somebody do it. And you'll be able to do this. I've taught plenty of people how to do pattern work, and with rare exceptions, everybody was able to do it. So don't look at this and think, oh, she does it, but I'll never be able to do that. Whoops, I didn't get this line just right. Make sure you're tracing them exactly right. You don't want any points, because that's what happens if it doesn't square at center front and center back. You get points. And it looks like all you have to do is just flip it over and it falls in place. But it takes a while till you get that skill. And just keep at it, keep trying, keep working at it, and you'll be able to do it. And my guess is the model's not going to need this dart, but we put it in just in case she does. Sometimes a person needs a dart here and needs this to be straight here. Sometimes a person needs this to come in here and doesn't need a dart here. It depends on the body. And there's the pattern on the open. Now it's very important, there's another notch that really, really matters, and that's the notch right here. I'm going to show you the easy way to do that. Leave it on the fold. I'm going to mark an 1/8 of an inch down, and just mark a V like this. Turn it over, mark a little V like that. And there's a V-notch that's right on the center back line. And I want to mark the center back line on here so I know exactly where it is. If I decide to cut a garment to match, I want to be able to find the center back line on the pattern. I'll bring this right here on this line. And it's important to mark this fold line. You wouldn't think it would happen. The patterns tend to refold themselves in interesting ways. So you really need a line that goes right down center back. You need that marked. Never cut anything on the fold. This is going to be cut on the open, and you can see why this would solve a lot of problems that cutting on the fold can create. I've now reduced the seam allowances on the sleeve. There's no point in showing you step by step with that because you've seen the others. Notice that the sleeve cap is on a 3/8 inch seam allowance, the same as the armhole. Seams that sew to other seams have the same seam allowance. All right? There are exceptions to that, but it's very, very rare. The side seams with the sleeve are 1/2 inch, and again, I left the hem exactly as it came. It says 2 inches on here, so I'm going to put a 2-inch hem on there. I've written on here that's a sleeve, and this is cut 2 because you cut 2 sleeves from the same pattern. Obviously, one is the reverse of the other, but that's understood.